In the 6 weeks since the IT Ministry notified the new Digital Media Code of Ethics to regulate content produced by streaming platforms, there has been no dearth of criticism lobbied against the government, from the lack of consultation around the new code to appropriation of judicial powers for the executive. According to a PwC report, India is the 10th largest OTT market in the world and is set to reach 11,900 crore by 2023. Today, in the second session of Forbes India's Disrupting the Discourse series, we talk to 4 creators and experts to understand how the guidelines will affect the content that OTT platforms produce, what the code means for creative freedom online, and if a government-led body should be the arbiter of taste. We have Tarun Katial, the founder CEO of Z5, who until December also headed the Digital Entertainment Committee at IAMAI, Gowree Gokhale, senior partner at Nishith Desai Associates, who leads their IP technology, media and entertainment law practice, Ujjwal Chaudhary, associate partner at RedSeer Consulting and specializes in consumer internet, and Sahil Shah, a stand-up comedian and one of the founders of East India Comedy, who had his Amazon special called Childish Behavior. So, first of all, to you, Tarun, given that you've been part of this industry for so long, it has been almost 6 weeks, as I said, since the new Digital Media Code of Ethics was notified. Do you know if any industry self-regulatory bodies have registered with the MIB, that is the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting?
I'm sure the IMAI is working towards making sure that they are going to be the body that will make sure that this regulation finds itself into execution and implementation. The IMAI, as you know, has also been on its own working on the self-regulation code and has done a really good job in building something that was fairly sustainable and long-term. I think, unfortunately or fortunately, the government order and the IMAI implementation toolkit almost came at the same time. And I think over the next 12 to 18 months, it will be the code that the government has actually put out and what IMAI does will be tested fairly well amongst both the users as well as the creators to see what are the boundaries that will get set around creative freedom as well as around telling stories that can push, a lot of envelopes. And can we create a new discourse around good creative and good storytelling, or will we start to get restrained around what we do in India in our creative ecosystem?
Got it. So before we get into the question of how this code actually came about, I'd like to know, what do you think? Do OTT platforms require regulation in the first place? Or was it better to go with the self-regulation mode, which IMAI had proposed earlier?
I definitely think that for a nascent industry like OTT, regulation was not the answer. But having a framework is very, very critical. What we've seen in the last almost 6 months is that everybody in both the creative industry as well as in the community at large and the users at large has become fairly sensitive to the stories being told, to the characters, and to the narrative that exists. Let me tell you that for any society to be able to do justice to creative storytelling, they have to have multiple forms of narrative. They cannot be one form of narrative. They cannot be one form of creative storytelling. And what has really happened is that without a framework, the only approach that had become for users as well as for the platforms was either the police or the courts. That was a very dangerous thing to happen. And I think it was required to have an implementation code that had the buy-in from the government. That would be the first port of call for all sorts of complaints and all sorts of issues that the users had. And that, I think, led to what we have today. The government does not want to deal with piecemeal complaints and challenges and issues. And the users want to have somewhere to go to, and the platforms need a mechanism to address all of that. And I think that's why either what the IMAI was doing or what the government is trying to do is trying to solve this puzzle really, really well.
So one of the things that you brought up, and Gowree, I'd like you to also consider this question, is that the code will somehow reduce the number of PILs that are filed in high courts or the number of police complaints that are registered against content creators and OTT platforms. Does the code really prevent that from happening? Because even after the code was notified, we did have the controversy around Bombay Begum's arise. And the people on Twitter directly went to the Child Protection Commission. They did not go to the platform itself. Gowree, if you want to go first.
So I think let me just sort of deal with the PIL point that you mentioned first, and then I'll come to the second point. At least what I see here, there were about 7 to 8 PILs being pending in various courts, requiring the government to bring in the self-regulation, right? So those PILs, of course, now have been transferred or maybe getting transferred to the Supreme Court. So those were one set of PILs to ask for a new law. In my mind, those PILs at least will be put to rest with the new rules that have been brought in place. But there are certain PILs of the nature where there is somebody goes to file FIR, that FIR is not registered, then you go challenge to say that let the FIR be registered, etc. Those type of issues are pending. For example, before Punjab and Haryana High Court, or some person just wanting to directly go to PIL court, complaining about some content being anti-religious or seditious and all that, right? So these are various situations. At least the high courts, I hope, will stay their hands to intervene in a PIL type of a situation with this code and direct the complainant to the level 1 mechanism, right? Or at least to the ministry. So now you have a mechanism where the courts don't need to intervene in the first instance. Coming to your point on FIR, I don't think that by itself the code will sort of solve the FIR problem, right? Because the code also recognizes that if there is an offense that has been committed, right, then that offense will take its own course. But somehow I feel, and I have honestly drafted some kind of a thought process around this, that FIR is simply a first information report, right, that somebody has filed. The question is whether the police should take action thereafter or not, or stay their hands till such time some other issues are resolved in some other manner, right? So can these two systems work together? So first, whether the FIR should be registered or not, that's a legal point, right? Nobody can refuse to register FIR. But a step thereafter, can we say that let the investigation not be commenced or arrest not be made till such time the level 3 tiered mechanism has been exhausted? Can we do that? In my mind, that is a possibility. Of course, if the CRPC, which is the Code of Criminal Procedure, is amended, to address this, that is the best case scenario. But even today, if the ministry works with the industry to create some sort of an SOP, in my mind, there is still a solve for that, right? So you have these multiple FIRs in different jurisdictions and all that. That probably can be addressed in this particular mechanism. And I'm happy to, whoever wants to know more details, I'm happy to give my thought process around that. How that there can be a solve, honestly, for this menace that the industry is facing.
Right, but does the code itself allow for intervention by police, or is it that you have to look at other laws, the Code of Criminal Procedure, etc., for that kind of intervention? There's nothing in the code that either allows for or prevents intervention by police or arrests.
So that is absolutely correct. So you're right, because the code is independently working, right? It is a consumer redressal. Let us put it in that manner, right? But if an offense has been created, the code is not saying that it will not be treated as an offense, right? So that is what I'm saying. So suppose the matter is taken, say, to a committee level, right? And the committee believes that there is an allegation, say, of obscenity or maybe anti-religious content and all of that, and committee concludes that this is not an objectionable content, right? It is not giving you a solve in a criminal case, unfortunately, right? The way you have a solve under, say, a CBFC or otherwise, it is not giving you a solve. That is the point I'm making, that the CRPC or IPC and the code need to talk to each other, which is not happening today. And over a period of time, if that can be solved, then your freedom of speech and expression issue can be addressed in a fair manner. And just on the point that unfortunately what has happened in the Indian context, a lot of provisions which curtail freedom of speech and expression under in line of 19.2 article 19.2 of the constitution, most of them are having a criminal consequence, right? So if you have a criminal consequence, and when there is in that context, as Tarun mentioned, there is a lot of subjectivity attached to the content, right? So when you have a sort of subjectivity attached to the content, each one's perception about that content may be different. In my mind, I'm going actually 10 steps behind whether it should be even considered as an offense, right? Because there is so much a subjectivity attached, right? So in my mind, a complete revisit also is required. Can you really curtail a freedom of speech and expression, which is so subjective in that context, by making it as an offense, right? And I'm
Right,
happy to give some
Gowree,
examples as we go along. Yeah.
Gowree, one sec. I think Sahil wants to add something here, and I think people like him who are content creators are the most affected, along with the streaming platforms themselves as an entity. Sahil, go ahead.
I mean, I agree with Gauri in a sense that, see, I'll tell you what, from a content creator perspective, it is very tough to judge anything. And right now, we are living in a time where anything can be taken as an offense. Like you could, now see, I'm a stand up comedian. That's my primary profession. I have to make jokes. I used to make jokes about the government. Now I can't make jokes about the government. I used to make jokes about my religion. Now I can't make jokes about my religion. And now it's reaching a point of time where when you're writing or when you're creating things, and this is a scary thing. I'm saying regulation aside, as a creator, it is a scary place to be in when you are writing something and your mind is stopping you and saying, no, I don't think you should say that. I don't think you should do that. I don't think you should push the boundary. I don't think we can get into this territory, that zone. And honestly, right now, it's very tough to figure out what people will get offended over. It's tough. I mean, tomorrow I could talk about dogs and there'll be a union of dogs who will be offended that I spoke about dogs. So, honestly, regulation is one thing, but like when you come to like freedom of speech, this is a big conversation to have, and it can't be solved so easily. I know you want platforms to self-regulate, and it's going to get tougher for us content creators, because there are so many things we want to say but we will never get to say, because platforms first will be like no, then the government is like no, then we ourselves are like, you know what, no. So we are planning for a retirement. I would just like to add that's what's been
Okay.
happening in the comedy community.
So, Sahil, comedy community perhaps has been suffering the most, and you have kind of also seen the evolution of platforms. So earlier you were on YouTube, which is a user-generated platform where anyone can upload content, and then of course you had your special on Amazon, and all those things happened, and there's been that kind of migration. So did that mean a difference in terms of how you were regulated? Did you have to self-censor? Was there pressure from the platforms already in terms of S&P perhaps?
So I still am on YouTube, and I love YouTube because YouTube you can say whatever you want, but there are still people who will take a screenshot or a video clipping, and even if you made that video private, they can, like nowadays people bring out video clippings of stand-up bits that we've made private but released 5-6 years ago to attack us. It's a tough place to be, but that's how it works. But I still like YouTube because there is no regulation. YouTube is still adding regulations day by day. You can't say this, you can't do this, make it child friendly, but I actually do enjoy YouTube a lot more. When I released my special on Amazon Prime, at that time, there were not so many regulations. They just wanted to go through a script and I could say whatever I wanted. Last month, I shot a web series. Okay, I'm not going to say, I'll just say I shot a web series, and there were so many regulations. There were so many things that we could not do. We had to show, like there was a situation, I'm not even kidding, where, okay, I'm not giving away any spoilers because it's not, but I just want to explain something. There was a scene where the police were going to arrest us. And one of the extras was playing the policeman. He took a lathi and he hit me. And they said, don't hit him. Hit the lathi on the ground. We have to be very careful about how we show policemen. And I'm like, wow, that's the level of, okay, do we have to think that much? Okay, cool. Then how are people going to like function? How are you going to shoot things? How are you going to show anything? It's just tough. It's and nowadays, because of, if platforms are going to come up with self-regulation, I'm telling you, there's going to be a lot of constraint on freedom. And comedy itself is an industry that relies on criticism, it relies on speaking truth, it relies on me talking to you about what happens in front of you to make you laugh, because you're like, oh, you're right, I didn't think of that. But if I'm not allowed to talk, case in point with everything that's happened in the past year, it's just going to get tougher.
Sahil, I think we're going to unpack this a lot more. But
Aram se.
Ujjwal, you had something to add.
Just maybe sort of taking a step back and looking at how OTT has been evolving in India, right? So I think if you look at numbers, right? So there are close to now 300 million people who sort of come on OTT platforms at least once a year, right? So whether it is sports, whether it is originals content or some other content, right? And there are close to 30 to 40 million people who actually pay for some of this content. So it is no more a fringe channel. I think we have sort of come to a situation where now this is a lot more mainstream. I think post lockdown, when I went back to my hometown, right, so a lot more people were streaming Netflix and some of the other platforms on their TVs, right. So even in terms of devices, there is more proliferation, right, and the need for cleaner content is very real, right, and that has not been addressed in the right way so far by the platforms, right? And I mean, if you look at, we did a survey where 20% of people who would have the pay capacity to become a subscriber do not subscribe to some of these OTTs because of the objectionable content being the number one reason, right? So I think cleaner content is definitely a need, and it is a mainstream enough channel now for us to take this seriously. So I think the intent is right. I think how it has been put together as a code and the nuances that are missing, right? I think that is a bigger challenge, right? So one, as Sahil rightly mentioned, right? So where do you sort of draw the line between what is right to show and what is not, and how does that really come together with freedom of speech and other rights, right? And the typical content creation rights. The other is how do you take the nuances of internet versus TV in in the picture while drafting this, right? So right now, I think it has just been done at the same level, right? While OTT being internet-driven medium, right? There can be a lot more nuance to what can or cannot be done, right? So I think, yeah. So maybe the intent is right, but I think there can be a lot more nuance which can be brought into this to make it easier for everyone.
So before I ask Sahil and Tarun to respond to that, Ujjwal, you mentioned this to some extent about whether we need to distinguish between content online versus content on TV, which is essentially the difference between push and pull content. Do you think that kind of and at least the movie industries, the Producers Guild of India, CBFC's argument all this while has been that we need to level the playing field between what's put on OTT platforms, what's released in the theaters, and what's put on TV for competitive reasons as well. So, do you think the code does that? Do you think what could the code have done better?
Right. So I think so. Coming to being competitive, I don't think that the regulations agenda or the objective should be to make all of them on a level playing field, right? The objective should be to treat each of them separately and look at their own nuances specifically, right? So in terms of channels, let's say we would have a lot more channels, right, compared to the OTT platforms, which are 40, and after this regulation, we might even see consolidation to a smaller number, right? So I think, and it is a TV is something you can just switch on, and you don't have any control on what is being shown. On an OTT platform, there is a lot more control that you have, right? And there are on most of the platforms now there are kid safety and parental controls active as well, which is not in the case of TV. right? So I don't think this is the right argument to make that having the same regulations makes it a level playing field, right? I don't think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Sahil, when you respond to Ujjwal's comment about there being a real need for cleaner content, uh, do you think we are on our way to getting Saas Bahu serials as original content on, say, Hotstar or Netflix?
Eventually, yes. I'm so sorry, but like the main reason why okay, stand-up comedy. Let's just get a quick basic course of what happened. Stand-up comedy started 10, 12 years ago. We started saying things that we could not say on television. And for a long time, we could not say on television. Till date, when it comes to TV, the amount of restrictions that there are, as opposed to when you come to a live show. Now, what is the beauty of a live show? There are things that are said in a live show that are deep, dark thoughts that cannot be shared, but you say it live because it's a personal environment. Obviously, when you record it, you shoot it, you think about it, you obviously put in thought as to whether this is going to go to a big audience. So are they going to take offense, so on and so forth. But the way things are going, and I'm being very honest, the way things are going, eventually, even as comedians, if you have a list of 10 topics and suddenly you can't talk about politics, religion, you can't talk about your family because, and I'm not even kidding, I have spoken about my dad and I've got insults saying, how dare you insult your dad? And I'm like, my dad was in the crowd. He was laughing at this. But so now I can't talk about my family. I can't talk about mental health. I can't talk about, what do I talk about? And it's the same thing, right? If you're writing something and you're eliminating thoughts before you've even written it, then you might as well stick to what works. And if Saas Bahu works, then let's go for it. I'm writing a Saas Bahu show. I urge all writers, go for it. Let's do it. I think that's the best way to progress on all platforms. All platforms. Just Saas Bahu throughout. No one. And I can promise you, I'm so sorry, I will end talking right now because I get very agitated over this. But I can promise you, in 2 years, there will be one Saas who will file a complaint and be like, this is offensive. This is a personal incident. And I take offense on all Saases. And then again, people are going to get involved and we are going to go down the same path. And then eventually you will turn on the TV and just stare at a blank screen because that is what we need to watch. Okay, sorry.
I can see everyone kind of itching to respond to that. So, Tarun, if you want to go ahead first. And
Listen, I wasn't wanting to respond to this at all because if you read my bio, I'm also responsible for a lot of the Sasbao serials being active in TV today. So,
sorry.
Just a small secret, and I don't tell many people that I met my wife on Kyunki Saas Bhi Kabhi Bahut. She was the executive producer, and I was the head of the channel at that time.
Okay.
And there's a picture of mine and Smriti Irani and Ekta Kapoor of 2002 surfaced on Instagram some months ago.
So I'm going to just leave the conversation right now. I'll just slightly exit out of frame right now.
But let me come back to what Sahil is saying, right? Video on demand and what Ujjwal was saying. Video on demand allows for diversity, right? That's the fundamental of OTT platforms or of video streaming or of social media, where you are allowed to choose what you like rather than you having to choose from some set of channels that give you what they can give you. And diversity of content is what has developed this entire industry over the last 5 years to become so much more vibrant, bring in so much more new talent, so many more new narratives. And I think it was fundamentally waiting to happen because independent cinema before that had started to push those boundaries already. I think it is as creators, as platforms, as the industry, it's our responsibility to be able to show the mirror to the society, to be able to build different narratives. And I always keep saying this, that, don't worry about what will happen and will censorship take over or will moderation take over, because fundamentally the industry is built between left and right brain. And unless you have enough left brain that is working, there will be no new ideas, and people will stop, being excited about the content they watch. Now, should the platforms start to become very what we call MOR, middle of the road, and start to do things that will not get them into trouble? No. Should the platforms cross boundaries? No. Now, is there a middle path? No. So I think it is going to make life slightly more difficult than it has been. It is going to push the writers and the creative people to think of things that can work in a slightly vitiated environment that we are in, but not give up their fundamental right to tell different stories. And I empathize with what Sahil is saying. I mean, I've been on the receiving end of this for many years. For 20 years, I've run platforms, and the same problem of somebody taking offense to something, even on Saas Bahu serials, and thinking that that we used to show Saas Bahus as very demeaning, in a very demeaning manner, and with Saas is leaving snakes against the bow in the world, and so on and so forth. So the problem continues in any form, but it just needs to be addressed sensibly. I think we need to redraw our boundaries. We need to understand that we need to say things which are important to change the narrative in the society, but we don't want to get into trouble and get into jail either. So where does one really find the balance? That will be the challenge. And
So, Tarun,
just let me finish. I have no doubt that the writing and the creative fraternity in India and the world over is going to continue to do that. No, Sahil, while Sahil may say we're going to look at the blank screen, he's going to go back and he's going to pen some thoughts about this conversation itself, and he's going to make fun of it. And that's the way it's going to be. And after the initial hurrah of both getting scared and putting a couple of people behind bars, we will find a balance. We will all go back to doing things which are right for us in the creative world.
but Tarun, in the last few weeks itself, we have seen which side the industry, at least the executive side of the industry, is aligning. In the last few years, we have seen a profusion of historical shows that valorize the Indian army, shows that focus on history, that only talks about the victories of India. And Mint recently reported that producers are now aiming for similar projects. And the biggest instance of that is, of course, Amazon's Ram Setu starring Akshay Kumar, which was announced immediately after the Tandav controversy and after the code came out. So do you think we have already fallen into place where we'll always err on the side of caution, self-censor, let people like Sahil know that, okay, you need to toe the line. I'm sorry, until and unless you're willing to take the liability on yourself through YouTube?
Let me tell you, Aditi, you're seeing more than it really exists, right? Nobody can negotiate a movie and get it started with Akshay Kumar on the floor overnight. If you need Akshay Kumar's dates, and if I want to make a movie with him today, 2023 or 2025 will be the first that I can get. So Ram Setu didn't start overnight because Tandav happened, and it will be foolish for five of us to be even saying that. And it'll be even more foolish for somebody like me after 20 years to even believe that, you could.
But the timing of the announcement is quite interesting.
You're seeing too much in it. It was bound to happen. Ram Setu has been in writing and in the making, and Akshay Kumar's dates have been booked, and now he's even got COVID making that film for very long. This has got nothing to do with Tandav, right? So, and I can also tell you that Uri was the biggest film of 2017 or 2018, and even on Z5, we had subscriptions, coming from him for it for 24 months after we released it on the platform. It has nothing to do with whether people like, or whether Tandav happened or whether something else happened. So please don't see more than exists. And I can tell you, if we as creators start to follow the middle of the road, then there will be nothing new to show to users, and we will have duds on our hand. And you can lose your job two ways. One, you get lots of duds. Two, you worry about what is happening with censorship. Most likely, people don't want to make duds because it hurts your career forever.
Right. Gowree, you wanted to add something.
Yes. So I agree, with what Tarun said, and I was going to make similar comments, but let me just give a different perspective, right? Ultimately, we are in a somewhat, sort of situation where you see the waves, right? So we are at the at the situation where things are little unstable, but I'm 100% sure that over a period of time they will settle down, and all of us have to be patient and working towards that as a as a community. Secondly, I just want to give an example. I was talking with one of the government officials on some controversy about some content, and in fact the government officer said that this is something has to be understood, that particular scene has to be understood in a particular context, and that can be done only by the creative people to understand that context, right? So people are cognizant that yes, things have to be understood in a context, and for that purpose I feel there have to be more conversations, and not just at the principal level but at the granular level, as to what do you mean by hurting religious sentiment. You keep discussing that, but what does it really mean? What has Supreme Court said about it? Supreme Court in fact goes on to say that you don't look at any content with the eyes of a person who's very sensitive person. You have to look at with the eyes of a person who's a reasonable person. I'm just paraphrasing or rephrasing that that thought. But these are the discussions at a granular level, whether for the creative team, for the platforms, and equally for the government, right? Suppose this committee is getting formed, these conversations have to be held with with the experts from the legal fraternity, maybe ex high court judges, ex Supreme Court judges, and let us be on the same page as to what do you mean by objectionable content. Today, that we first of all have 4 Indias in India, right? So each one is at a different level of understanding, and that is the biggest issue we are facing today when we are looking at regulation. Because I'm looking at to say, okay, what is it saying? Okay, this comply with the law of the land, that's all what it is saying, right? But that is how I as a lawyer have understood that, okay, there is nothing wrong in it. But maybe somebody else is seeing that as an opportunity to complain for each and every piece of content. Every day they will file the complaint without realizing that whether it is violating of the law or not, right? So this understanding is lacking, and that is why I feel there is a gap in terms of what we are seeing in today's circumstances.
Point about there being multiple Indias within one India, because I was wondering what kind of impact does this new code of ethics have on smaller regional OTT platforms that are often arguably more intrepid than bigger OTT platforms. I mean, for instance, The Great Indian Kitchen was passed over by Netflix, Amazon, and a bunch of other mainstream OTT platforms, and eventually picked up by Stream, which is a very small platform. And it's only 3 days ago that Amazon finally picked it up again for after it became successful on Stream. So, what happens to the smaller players?
So I think for the smaller players, as I said, I think I don't necessarily believe that the code is doing anything positive or negative for in the context of smaller players per se, right? I think each player, when they come in the self-regulatory realm, right? I hope the self-regulatory bodies assist in this understanding for the smaller platforms as well, to come up to speed as to what is an expectation, right? Earlier, being a part of self-regulatory body was optional, right? We had only few players which were part of IMI. Now it is mandatory. So at least they get some support, in terms of understanding by the self-regulatory body. That is the way I look at it, honestly, because earlier they may not be having that kind of guidance. Now they probably get better guidance from the self-regulatory bodies.
Right. So, Ujjwal, what kind of impact will the code have on the investments that are made into OTT platforms, both big and small, and especially overseas investments into Indian platforms?
Right. I think so. One of the larger industry impacts that we foresee from this regulation is consolidation, right? And while it may not be, let's say, a very direct result of this, right? But see, one of the ways that some of the smaller and niche platforms, get their viewers, right? Whether it is subscriber SVOD or AVOD, right? Advertising driven or subscription driven, is through, let's say, content which is not completely kosher, right? There is a lot of objectionable content that you will find on smaller platforms, right? And a lot of times right now it kind of doesn't get noticed, right? Or it gets noticed but doesn't get reported, right? So I think with some of these regulations coming in and with them getting regulated more clearly through even self-regulatory bodies, right? We are I think going to see some consolidation. So for the larger platforms, which have the tech to be able to do some of these things, B are more premium anyway, and hence have a premium audience who are generally more pro cleaner content, right? Compared to, let's say, an audience of lower paying capacity, which would be, let's say, college students, which would be lower income group, right? Which would be more coming on some of these platforms for some of that content, right? So I think once that traffic sort of goes down, right, for the smaller apps, right, it might become difficult for them to survive, whether it is on ad revenue or whether it is on subscription revenue, and hence we might see some of them eventually close down, right? So I think from that perspective, for the larger platforms, it is actually a blessing in disguise. And as I said in the beginning, right, so there are at least 20% of people who would non-users who would come to these platforms if they were sure of cleaner content. And in that sense, since most of them have, let's say, a slightly more premium or subscription base, they would sort of get benefit from the code.
Right. So Gowree also mentioned how there are now multiple self-regulatory bodies possible. And my understanding is that one of the reasons why the MIB, that is the Information and Broadcasting Ministry, rejected the earlier three iterations of the IAMAI self-regulatory code was because it did not have industry consensus. Does the code from that perspective in a way defeat what MIB's major contention against the proposed self-regulatory code was? Tarun, if you want to address that, because at that time, from what I remember, the implementation toolkit, which came out on February 11, had 17 signatories, and MIB still maintains you don't have consensus in the industry.
I think 17 or 20 is a number that covers almost 80-90% of video streaming in the country. So I don't think the challenge that MIB had was that they didn't think it was consensus or there was consensus. Truly, the challenge that MIB had was that the IMEI self-regulation code took too much time into implementation. And the tier 2 that they wanted, which was having independent professionals come and give you guidance or give you opinion or give you feedback on content, had not been implemented fast enough. So those were the two real asks, right? Get the age gating, get the entire content sorted very, very quickly, and get a credible tier 2 mechanism going where people are able to come and get feedback or get opinion or have independent body or an independent set of people be able to do this rather than just your own executive. So I think we as a industry took too long to sort that and move forward. Yes, like in any industry, there are diverse opinions about what should happen and shouldn't happen. And that took a little bit longer than we needed to have done to resolve. But eventually, the toolkit is quite solid, and it's not very different from what the MIB also spoke about themselves. The only difference is that now there is also a government panel as the last resort for the consumers to get to, which in a way was not required. But now that the government has themselves set this out, like Gowree mentioned, I think what is now critical is to make sure that there is no coercive action that gets taken against content creators and platforms anymore, and that this code of conduct and this tiered mechanism of resolving challenges that users have is put to test and is the only thing that people use rather than using FIRs and PILs and everything else. And all issues get first funneled into this mechanism, and that this outcome is taken very, very seriously rather than having parallel ways of adjudicating what is right or wrong.
So, as you also pointed out, the tier 3 in the new mechanism that's been proposed by the code is headed by a bureaucrat at the position of joint secretary, if I remember correctly, in the MIB. Should the government and the executive in particular be the arbiter of taste online? Do you think that works?
I don't think the government is arbitrating taste. I think we're taking that too far. What the government is doing is that it's addressing user complaints, right? It's not telling you whether this is, good or bad. It's just telling you whether you're addressing after you have your first level, second level still hasn't addressed what the users want. Then there is somebody else to address it to say, listen, what the user is saying is right or wrong, and is it against the law of the country? Is it against the spirit of what we stand as a nation? And this will get tested, that the government will come and tell you that this is worthy of takedown and this is not worthy of takedown, but then you also have the right to go to the court. I can tell you, out of all the experience, even on TV, there is very little that the government ever will go down and ask you to take down until it is truly against the law of the country. And the government or any bureaucracy never wants to be seen as trampling the freedom of expression of any creator in this nation, because that really goes against them. So this would actually not happen, or happen much lesser than you think, because it's going to be in public domain, and every decision a government body like this takes will be up for scrutiny, will be up for views, and will be up for testing in the courts.
So, Tarun, that's where the code doesn't really say that the decisions taken by this three-tier process have to be in the public domain. And it's true that unlike Section 69A under the IT Act, there's no confidentiality clause attached to the steps taken by this review committee. But just the sheer existence of the executive on top of this hierarchy, on top of this grievance redressal mechanism, does it have an impact on how content creators, think of approaching content? Sahil, if you'd like to add to that.
Let me finish this, Aditi. So what does the executive do, you tell me? The executive gets a ton of complaints every week, every month, every day. And they can do two things. One, they can say, let the courts decide, and then everybody can go to the police station and the court. Or they can build a mechanism that is internal, which they have allowed the tier 1 and the tier 2 to be. And then if nothing gets solved, then can move to tier 3. But really, the executive also doesn't want to do this. They are only doing it because they have no other option on how to deal with this barrage of complaints on a daily basis.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's what I want. Am I audible now? So, Sahil, that's what I want to know. Even if the executive doesn't really order content takedown, doesn't tell you to censor your show, what is the impact it has on how you approach the show? For instance, right in the beginning, you mentioned that people, at the end of the day, everyone will end up making Saas Bahu serials because we can't talk about these 10 different things. So, does it really trample on people's freedom of expression, freedom of speech? Sahil, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm going to be very honest. The problem with content today is that while there would be an executive who decides, okay, whether this is offensive, whether this is not, so on and so forth, keep that aside. You're underestimating the power of the public. You're underestimating the power that Twitter campaigns can be launched like this. I can pay 1,000 rupees right now and get a campaign launched against a show. It takes literally seconds to get things trending. I'll give you an example. I was watching Tandav. When I saw Tandav, the first thing I saw was the main character. His name was Shiva, and I saw that it was a Muslim actor playing that, and I'm like, how did they not think about this? This is going to happen. People are going to get outraged, and then obviously they got outraged over multiple reasons. Apart from that oh, they did that. See, what people are not understanding is that public, when it comes together right now, and what has happened is that, and it's not only in India now, I need to broaden it up, it's happening around the world. Okay, times are changing, but there is this one thing that's going on right now. It's called cancel culture, and cancel culture is happening around the world, where if the public rallies their support against something, no matter how much you want to defend yourself, no matter how much there is a body that's like, no, I don't find this offensive, if the public is screaming, cancel, you're cancelled. It's as simple as that. So my whole perspective is that it's great that we have regulation. It's great that there will be someone who will be deciding, someone who will be arbitrating. But at the end of the day, you still can't control a mass, and that's the biggest problem. The mass has now been, how do I put it without sounding really like, I remember I had this conversation. The mass, everyone has a voice and everyone wants to scream. Let's just put it that way. So we are right now in a screaming void of people who are just screaming non-stop over anything and everything. Okay, I'll just a very simple thing. Twitter started many years ago. When Twitter first started many years ago, there was a point of time where you could say whatever you wanted, whatever, because there was no one regulating it. Forget regulating, there was no one creating offense or hashtag campaigns. Now, a lot of people I know, a lot of comics, they are not on Twitter anymore. They've left. A lot of people I know have deleted all the previous tweets because an old tweet surfaces, the mass attacks you, that's it, you're cancelled. And there's no one to come in and say, no, I don't think this is offensive. Personally, as a body, I'm a social media body, I don't think this is offensive. You all should back down. They won't back down. So that's the, how do you, I don't know how to differentiate this thing. Even though it's good that the government is doing this, you can't, it's just, see, I'm coming from very negative perspective, but I don't think it's just going to go downhill from here. That's my opinion.
I think, Sahil, the government has already tried to address it to some extent, distinguishing between social media and intermediaries on the one hand and OTT platforms on the other. So, which is why we are focusing on the OTT.
No, social media was an example. I was just giving an example as to how times have changed, how content has changed, right? How you could say whatever without any backlash. That is what freedom of expression is. If you look at USA, okay, and I'm not saying, oh my God, foreign countries are best, but USA, if you look at, they did this, the presidents, they do the White House Correspondents' Dinner, if you've ever seen that, where the top journalists roast the president of the United States. And then Obama came on board and roasted himself, saying that, Trump keeps on making fun of me, saying I'm from Kenya, and then he showed a Lion King clip. And you're just like, wow. I wish for a day where I could do this. I wish for a day where this could be broadcasted and nobody took offense. Nobody. Everyone's like, haha, everyone's in on the joke. Everyone is laughing. So, everyone's happy.
We have a question from the audience. When we talk about cancel culture and this kind of mass mobilization, and we saw some of this mass mobilization also happen with Tandav in particular, because the Quint reported that multiple complaints were filed against Tandav and they practically had the same language. And we're talking complaints in hundreds of thousands, if I remember correctly. So do you think there's any going back once we have reached this point in the cultural milieu, so to say, of cancel culture? Or is this here to stay?
It's here to stay. It's happened to me. Why do you think I'm getting so angry? Because it's happened to me. I have had a stand-up bit of mine that was many years ago taken out of context. I have had attacks. I have had insults. I have had my family insulted. I have had death threats. I was sitting there so afraid because my family's public information is available online. I didn't want them to go to my family. I had to apologize also because I wanted to just make sure that nobody gets offended over something that is 7 years old. How do I explain context? How do you explain context to each and every person in the mass? It's not possible. And unfortunately, it's happening and it's here to stay. And that's the harsh truth that we've all have to sit with. And it's going to affect everything that you see. Everything.
So, Tarun, we have a question from the audience related to what Sahil's talking about, that democratization of complaints will have immediate impact on content creation. So how can the executives at OTT platforms help creators preempt these attacks and potentially mitigate their effect?
I think communication has a big role to play. I think if you're going to do something that is going to push the envelope, you've got to talk about it very clearly and openly and honestly, and not hide behind it, right? Talk about the fact that we are taking a stand, and we're taking a stand because we think the society has issues behind it. Talk about it because you think that doing something to change mindsets. Um, Put behind yourself your rationale and go out and take a loud noise around it, right? Because noise can happen two sides. If you hide behind any issues, if you hide them, if you put them under the carpet, people are going to go behind you, right? But if you think that you're talking about Dalit atrocities, if you think you're talking about, religion atrocities, if you think you're going to talk about issues that exist between gender diversity, then go out and talk about it. Say that you're going to talk about it. The good part of what American television that we keep referring to is that they talk about it. Every maker says that I'm going to address the issues of, black and white. I'm going to address the issues of gender diversity, and that's how they pitched it, right? What happens with us? And I can tell you, even I'm guilty of it. We do it, but we say, let's not talk about it too much because we'll attract attention to ourselves. And we hope that nobody will notice. And then, we will get on with our life and we'll silently make a point. You cannot silently make a point. You have to have the audacity to make a point.
But Tarun, even when content creators have that audacity to make the point, OTT platforms actively censor them and censored them in the past, even before the code came in.
OTT
For
platforms
instance,
don't censor them. It is
Masan was censored before it was uploaded
look
to
at Sanjay
Hotstar.
Leela Bhansali. He is an example of somebody who says who's going to take a stand, right? And Padmavat was a big challenge for him. Everybody said that, how could he show sati and so on and so forth. He was showing a mirror of what even today exists for women in this country, right? And,
But Tarun,
he went
don't we
ahead.
need to...
And his next film also is already in trouble. But he's not willing to back down.
But Sahil, perhaps you can add here.
Sorry.
Is there a difference between a Sanjay Leela Bhansali and a young person who's creating content on YouTube and potentially planning to move to, say, Netflix, Amazon, when Netflix, Amazon, Hotstar, Z5 have all the power in terms of economics? There is a power imbalance there. So if they say...
There is a power imbalance there, but if he's really popular and if he can do enough for himself, he'll stay on YouTube. He doesn't need to go to Netflix or Amazon.
Sahil, do you want to add something
democratization there? You can even put your own content behind the paywall on YouTube now. He can go to Patreon if he wants.
Which a lot of people will start doing. A lot of people will start also weeding out the audience. See, the best part about the thing with an OTT is that anyone can watch it. The thing about having your own Patreon is that you decide who watches your content. I know that gets into very tricky territory, but then you can at least be like, okay, I know that the audience I am. So like, for example, I'll give you like a very, again, I sideline into examples, but if you do a comedy show and tomorrow all of you will come for a comedy show, you will see me talk about things that whatever I want to talk about, and I will not be afraid. I will speak and I will say, because I know you guys have come to watch me. But if I'm doing like a corporate show, there are obviously restrictions because I don't know. I'm liable for anything. The company is liable for anything. So it's almost like that, like a public versus corporate. That is exactly what the...
and technology allows us to do a lot of this today. So, Aditi, we shouldn't get caught up in saying that because Amazon and Netflix have the money, that's why they would censor and we will all get censored. Like I just said in the beginning, this is a phase. It's not going to become the way content gets consumed. And if content gets so middle of the road and gets so boring, then Amazon and Netflix or Z5 or Hotstar are not going to be the favorite platforms of people who want an alternative narrative, which is a large part of the population of this country.
So tell me one thing: are shows like the Patriot Act or the John Oliver Show possible in India? I know we had on air with AIB.
Some people like Sahil and all are doing it on a daily basis.
No,
that's
but
what
they're
they
on
do.
YouTube.
But are they... credit.
No, but they do it on YouTube. There's a difference between a UGC platform like YouTube versus OTT.
For the user, he has to get content. He can watch
on YouTube. On YouTube, Sahil has to create all the content himself, take all the liability himself. And why is it that the bigger platforms are not willing to bet on the creators that way? That is the question.
Aditi, it is their business to decide what they want to do. You cannot make it your business to say that they must fund A content or B content. But can you do this content if that's your question? Yes, you can do this content. Can your users consume this content? Yes, they can consume this content. Now, I'm not here to define what should be anybody's commissioning strategy. But is that content accessible and possible for users in this country? Yes, it is. There are many business models that will allow you to do that content.
Sahil, do you want to add something to that?
No, I mean, I agree. See, the thing is, you can't see, there are times when you can compare YouTube to platforms, but right now you can't compare YouTube to platforms. If you're talking about news comedy, right? Platform is obviously going to be careful because they are also putting in the money and investment into you. So you as an artist also have to be very smart about how, see, it's very simple. You're getting someone else on board into your thought process. And you have to consider things like that. You can't just be like, okay, this is what I want to do tomorrow. I want to talk about the government. Chal, pay me money. Let's go. It doesn't work like that. That's why we have YouTube for people who want to let their opinions out. And it's the same thing. YouTube also, there are so many. Have you read hate comments on YouTube? Have you read the comments that we get for talking the things that we want to talk about? So that at least you can read the thing. At least with the platform, there is no comment section. So at least that's a happier time for us. But honestly speaking, you can't do the YouTube platform comparison in that aspect. I agree with Tarun.
Okay, Gowree, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think the whole thing about the content, right? Whether it has to be edgy, because you had certain type of content coming in, then people started copying that content, right? And in fact, some of the talent I've read, some of the interviews of Nawazuddin or Pankaj Tripathi and all that, they were saying that only because certain things work in a certain show does not mean that there has to be a repeated content, right? So, okay, there may be edgy content that is accepted, but you need to move on, right? So the creativity itself will be an answer to some of the situations that we are seeing today. Number two, the point I want to make, especially in the Indian context, there are so many stories to tell, right? You have seen so many interesting stories that have come out. And, taking the point what Tarun said, I just want to add a philosophical angle there. Ultimately, there is a purpose of a particular content, right? You have to see everything from a purpose perspective, right? Like one thing is just to make people laugh, could be the purpose. Other one is where you are actually trying to bring about a change in the society by showing something that is going wrong. And for that purpose, you need to show that, sort of, things that are happening in the society. So the context is to make about a change, right? In that you're showing, not for showing for sake of showing, right? So I think once the creative people also, I'm sure, understand that aspect. And as Sahil said, ultimately, they will find a way. So let's not get too worried about this has happened, that has happened. There will be a way out and things will settle down. But if you keep the purpose at the back of your mind, everything will fall in place. And I mean, the some of the shows that you mentioned, for example, do you think that I mean, there is a lot of discussion as lawyers also, we get engaged into, Aditi, when we review the script, where we review, we brainstorm what is allowed, not allowed, more from a legality perspective, right? So that amount of discussion and debate is required. And there is some, if the law has been defined, the law is defining what is illegal, either you challenge that law or you work within that law, right? I understand that this public sentiment and all this is a completely different point, but I'm just talking within the four corners of the law. If you have to work within that, if you don't agree with that, you better go and say that, like what we saw in the Shreya Singhal case, right? It was challenged, 66A was challenged in the Supreme Court and struck down. So take that bold step.
To leave in a few minutes. So do you have any closing comments in terms of what is the way forward? What would an ideal method of regulating content online look like? Or is that an oxymoron by definition? You're on mute. I didn't censor you.
Yeah, no, I think, as Tarun said, right, I agree. Some of it is a phase, right? And while all of us might sound a bit pessimistic, right, all is not lost, right? If we look at, what used to make us awkward, in front of watching content with family, right, 10 years back, right? I think that has changed significantly, right? But we have obviously become more conscious of some other different content, which could be political, which could be religious, right? Which is not in isolation, right? It is the situations that we live in, right? So Tarun mentioned toolkit in one of like while saying something, right? And for 5 minutes, I was just thinking if it is the right thing to say here, right? So I think this is I think laws, regulations are a mirror of the times that we live in, right? So, and I don't think that everything is lost. I think it is a phase and we will sort of find an equilibrium, hopefully. Right. And I think that's the entire view for me.
Yeah, I mean, we just
Sahil,
have to be positive. I was just going to jump to that. Like, I mean, I know there's been a lot of cynicism and a lot of pessimism, and everyone's like, I specifically am like, oh, you can't. But I think that's the beauty of content. Every time, all content creators in the world are children. You tell a child, don't do something, the child will do the opposite. And I'm just telling you this: the more you tell us not to do something, the more we will create, the more we
No,
will
I
find
know.
a way, the more we will express ourselves. So,
You will.
yeah,
It will win. Don't worry. It will.
yeah,
We'll find a
yeah.
good balance, and I'm very hopeful that India has a very good set of writers, creators. We're not going to get bogged down by all of this. This is a phase. Don't think that Tandav happened and Ram Setu got made. We'll be blind to think Akshay Kumar gave you dates in 5 days, right? Those things don't happen.
but
So we'll find a
Tarun,
way. That's all.
okay, got it. In adversity, things shall arise.
Yeah, that's
Fingers
really
crossed.
all the very best. Yeah.
Right. Gowree, do you have any final comments to add?
No, I think we just have to remain positive, and I have been working on this self-regulation concept from 2015. Now, somewhere it is coming up. So, if level 1, level 2 take care of themselves, the government, ideally should not get to intervene. But I'm sure if all the stakeholders work together, including the audience, we'll find a solution, and the creativity will prevail.
Okay. So I think that's a good optimistic note to end on. Thank you, Gowree, Ujjwal, Sahil, and Tarun for being a part of the second edition of Disrupting the Discourse. And we'll see you for the third edition. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, guys.